In this episode, we're going to hear 3 very weird and strange encounters. But before we get to the stories, I want to mention there are 2 new channels of mine that you should definitely check out. The first is Donovan Dread 2, where I release the same great content, just a little shorter in length. Then there's Dread Captures, where we analyze various encounters that were captured on video, that were sent in to us, or that are available online. So if you're digging my content, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll keep narrating these creepy encounters. Now let's get to the stories. Hey Donovan, if any of your listeners are from Maine, then they might be interested in this. Over the summer, I was canoeing on the Saco River by myself, just to get away for a few days. Sometimes you've just got to clear your head and not hear people's voices. You know what I mean? Although at the end of this trip, I was wishing I'd brought someone with me, just so that I'd have someone to back me up, that it really happened. I did have my dog Bo with me, but he's not much good as a witness. It started out pretty pleasant. If you've never been on the Saco, then you need to give it a try. There's a lot of sandbars you can just pull up your boat and pitch a tent. My plan was to find a good spot and stay put there for 2 nights, but I left after the first one. Bo's real good about sticking close to me. He's a black lab, and you know they're in heaven around water. I had been paddling for about a half an hour, but I could tell Bo was itching to swim. So I told him, okay. I was good to let the current take me downstream for a bit, just using the paddle to keep myself from turning sideways. Bo would swim to the shore and race around, popping out and checking to see where I was. Then he'd jump back in the river and swim near the boat for a bit before doing the whole thing all over again. He was happy as a lark, big goofy dog grin on his face. At one point, I heard him start barking when he was on land. I whistled and called him, clapping my hands to get his attention. It took a few minutes, but he showed up on the shore. He just sat down and looked at me, which was unusual. I mean, him not swimming out to me. So I thought maybe he's tired and I paddled into shore. I got out to go relieve myself in the woods, but the minute I started to head away from the bank, Bo got all anxious, running around me and barking. I couldn't tell what was going on with him, but he was mighty jumpy. I had to wonder if maybe he'd seen a snake or something. Sometimes a big enough snake will get him acting wild. I just walked over to the nearest tree and did my thing, telling him to calm down. When I started to walk back to the boat, I saw something a little strange on the sand. There were half a dozen dead fish laying there, with only the bellies eaten out. Kind of strange because just about any animal I know would eat the head too, even if they left the tail. But these all just had half-moon-shaped bites taken out of them, so I was a little puzzled by that. There weren't too many flies on them yet, so it must have just happened fairly recently. After a minute, I just put it out of my head, getting Bo all settled in the boat and shoving off. He seemed content just to be a passenger at this point, sitting in the bow and keeping an eagle-eyed watch on the right-hand bank. We found a good sandbar not long after that, and I was ready to be off the river. I beached the boat and tied it, and Bo jumped out, sniffing around while I unloaded my gear. He was sticking pretty close to me, even though I told him, go on, it's okay. Usually when I tell him that, he's just like a little kid at recess, and just runs off and explores. But he hung out with me while I pitched the tent. It was pretty darn relaxing, not having anyone around, just me and the river and my dog. That evening, I was kicked back by the fire when Bo started acting weird again. He ambled over to the riverbank and was standing there with his tail tucked down, just whining. I called him a few times, but he wouldn't come. So I finally walked over there to see what was up. I couldn't see a damn thing staring out at the river in the dark. But then I heard some splashing. And it sounded big, not like a fish. That had me wondering if there was a bear nearby. They're pretty good swimmers, you know. I already had my food hung in a tree, but I made Bo come back with me to the fire just in case. He was acting really nervous. And within a few minutes, he went to the tent door and just stood there whining. I've got a 2-room tent, and I always have Bo sleeping in there with me. I wondered if maybe he wasn't feeling well, that he wanted to go inside so early. It's usually the other way around. I get in there with him and he whines to go back out. I was pretty beat, so I didn't stay up much longer. Bo had laid down right in front of the tent, and he was happy when I joined him. We got inside and settled in, and I fell asleep straight away. I woke up with the light shining in and Bo barking his head off. He looked at me when I sat up, and he started whining. So I unzipped the tent thinking he had to pee. While I was still getting dressed, I heard a big splash and Bo yelped. Frantic, I stumbled outside without my shoes on because he sounded hurt. And he was. He loped over to me and he had this big scrape down his foreleg that was bleeding. I looked around, but I couldn't see any threat. So I ducked back into the tent and grabbed my first aid kit and a bandana. Poor Bo was trembling all over while I cleaned and dressed his wound, wrapping the bandana over a gauze pad. It didn't look too bad, but I wondered what it could have been. It looked like he had been clawed, not bitten. Maybe a raccoon, I thought. I went back over to the river and looked out, but I didn't see anything. Still, with my boy getting scraped up, I felt like we better pack it in. He stayed right by my side while I tore down the tent and packed the boat back up, a sure sign he was feeling bad. As I got into the boat with Bo riding in front, I thought I saw something move just beneath the surface of the water, about 15 feet out. Just the way the surface rippled. Strange, but I thought I imagined it, so I shoved off. No sooner had I started paddling than I felt the boat bump into something. A log, I thought. But then suddenly we were violently wrenched sideways, almost like something had grabbed us. I turned to look, and there was this thing. I don't even know what it was. It was something like out of a B movie. Only part of its head was above the water, less than 10 feet from us. The head was as big as a man's head, but reptilian looking, all bumpy with scales. It had these big bug eyes completely black, and it was submerged up to its eyes. I couldn't see the rest of it, but I didn't need to. It was scary as hell. Bo started whining and growling, but then kind of hunkered down like he didn't want to be seen. I had to think that maybe this thing was what he had gotten to a scuffle with. I'll tell you plain, I was scared to death. So I just started paddling hard, getting away from it, wondering how fast that thing could swim. It stayed right where it was, though. Thank God, it never came after us. I don't know what the hell that was. I've never heard of any creature like this. It had me question my sanity. At one point, I had to wonder if it was someone in a rubber mask. But there was no one around. No boats that morning at all. It would ease my mind a little if someone else had seen or heard this creature. So speak up if you have. By the way, Bo's fine. His cut healed up with no problem. But we're gonna find another river. Hi, Donovan. I saw something recently that I found pretty horrific. I hope you don't mind me using your platform to tell my story. It's the only way I can be safe when I report what I saw. Once this is out in the open, I know that no one can come after me. My friend and I have a client in our landscaping business who's pretty high up the totem pole. He has a high-profile job and a lot of rich friends. This story isn't about him. He's actually pretty cool. He doesn't act like he's better than anyone else because he drives a fancy car or has a lot of money. We did a pretty extensive job for him over the summer. He's got acres of land and had a swimming pool put in, then hired our company to completely enclose it with shrubs and trees because his ex-model girlfriend likes to sunbathe in the nude. I know, right? This guy has it made. It took us most of the summer to complete the job. He was very specific in what he wanted, but we were glad to have such a big job. He's a great client and gave us a huge tip. Then he invited us to a party his friend was having on Labor Day. He said the guy was a really well-known photographer and had a huge estate out in the middle of nowhere. He told us there would be a lot of chicks and free booze and other stuff too. Neither one of us had any big plans for the weekend, so we were like, sure, why not? It seemed like it would be a really fun way to officially end the summer season. Boy, was I wrong. Now I'm having nightmares about what I saw, and I'd wish I'd never gone to the damn thing. When we got there, we were both really wowed by the size of this guy's estate. He had these fancy wrought iron gates at the end of a long driveway, and it was my first time having to use an intercom to announce ourselves so the gates would open. It felt like something out of a movie. We parked my buddy's 2000 Honda CR-V in the middle of a bunch of snazzy sports cars and took a few minutes to admire the fancy rides. I took a few pics with my phone to show my dad. I knew he'd be impressed I'd be rubbing elbows with these folks. I was afraid that we'd stand out like a couple of sore thumbs, and things would be awkward, but once we got up to the house, which was packed, everyone was really cool and friendly, and made us feel welcome. It was a hell of a party. Top shelf booze, lots of model chicks, and a live band playing, and a table of other recreational enhancements, if you know what I mean. My buddy and I don't touch that stuff, but it was still mind-boggling to see how much dough this guy was throwing away to keep his guests in high spirits. Everything was going good until we chatted with the party's host's younger brother, a guy in his late 20s. He was all about, let me show you this, and check out my brother's collection of type of stuff, kind of showing off. He says to me out of the blue, hey, you believe in Bigfoot? I'm thinking it was an opening to a joke, so I laughed and said, I don't know, should I? He said, no, I'm serious. You know, a lot of people say it's not real. Do you believe it's real or not? I shook my head and said, probably not. And my buddy chimed in saying, absolutely not. Urban legend. The guy gets this funny look on his face and says, I bet you 100 I can change your mind. I didn't know what to think, but I wasn't about to bet $100 on anything. I just shook my head and smiled. My buddy said, I'll bet you 20. That's all I got on me. The guy just grins and says, it's a deal, follow me. He turns and heads through the house, winding through all these people. My pal just looks at me and shrugs and follows the dude, so I went too. This house was huge. I don't know, maybe 8,000 square feet, just a guess. So we walk for a minute and we finally get away from the crowd and come to this locked door. The guy has a key, and when he opens it, I can see its steps leading down to a basement. The smell coming up from the basement was gross. It smelled like a zoo. I must have shown on my face what I was thinking, because the guy laughed and said, oh, it's not that bad, come on. You'll see, it's worth it. Just breathe through your mouth. I looked at my friend like, what have you gotten us into? He shrugged and followed the guy down the stairs, with me right behind him. As soon as we got down there, I saw what made it smell so bad. This guy was keeping a bunch of exotic animals in cages in his basement. He had a white Siberian tiger, a bunch of really big snakes, and something I didn't really recognize for sure. I think it was a sloth. I felt really bad for the tiger. It had a chain around its neck, even though it was in a cage, and it looked miserable. It didn't even move when we walked by, like it had gone somewhere else in its head to escape. But all my thoughts about that poor animal flew right out of my head when I saw what was in the last cage. It was pretty small, like it was a young one, but I swear to God, this thing looked like a Bigfoot from the movies. It was in a cage, but just like the tiger, it had a chain around its neck too, and it was afraid. When it saw the guy, it kind of cowered back. It was covered completely in fur except for its face and hands and feet. It had a prominent brow ridge like a caveman, but it had human eyes. It was freaky as hell, but I had to feel bad for it. The cage was filthy, and the thing was terrified. So what do you say now, the guy said, with his big grin on his face. I was speechless. My buddy said, holy crap, where did it come from? He pulled out his money and paid the guy. The guy got really cagey about where. Just said his brother has connections all over the globe, and he paid a really high price for it. I was feeling kind of sick from the smell. I guess I looked green because the guy said we should go back upstairs. When we got to the staircase, he turned around and warned us. You can't tell anyone about this. If word gets out, I'll know it was you guys. And my brother knows how to make people just disappear. He was deadly serious, I could tell. That party was back at the beginning of September, and I haven't told anyone until now. I just feel like the conditions this thing was being kept in was inhumane. It's really bothering me. I've decided that I'm going to go to the authorities. I'll tell them where the house is. Maybe you guys will see this story in the news soon. I hope this story here will protect me from any retribution. The more people that share this story, the more my mind will be at ease. They can't stop all of us, right? Thanks, Donovan. I like to consider myself a pretty sensible person. I'm never too erratic or overreacting to situations. If I'm wrong, I take accountability for my actions, so I have no reason to feed into any conspiracy-fueled nonsense. What I witnessed the summer I retired from 30 years of fighting wildlife almost scared me half to death. It was something straight out of horror films my kids love to watch so much. The very things I've always told them not to be afraid of was right in front of my face. It was my dream after retirement to move back to my hometown, right outside of Fresno, California, near the river. I wanted to feel at peace in a slightly more rural area, while still being accessible to the city. I was still near my kids, able to see them at any time that I wanted. My dreams of a peaceful life, fishing in my backyard, sitting on the porch playing Sudoku in the morning, were coming true. I could finally be at ease. The only fires left to fight coming from the stove after my cooking attempts. I closed on a home and started moving my things back and forth from Los Angeles. It was bittersweet, of course, as I had many friends there who wouldn't be right up the street from me anymore. Then one day, my friend of 10 years started prying into my intentions for moving. They seemed to be pressed about Fresno specifically for some reason. I wasn't sure if it was due to personal experience with people or them just not wanting me to go. After beating around the bush, they got to the point where there's this old tale of something in Fresno that was really freaky, as they put it. Again, I'm a sensible person, so when I hear tall tales, they don't faze me much. Not even pictures always influence my opinion. Since we've been friends for so long, I still valued their opinion and understood it must be serious if they brought it up. So I listened to their story of an old spouse whose family lived around the same lake I was moving near. One morning while waiting for the school bus, he saw some crazy-looking thing running full speed on all fours. At this point, I was tuned out, not wanting to believe any recollection of something 30-plus years ago as seen by a child. The reality is, children are more likely to witness supernatural beings and accept them as real because they haven't been conditioned to believe otherwise. I listened to them explain the psychological impact it had on them as a child. While empathizing, I could not see myself changing my mind about moving simply based on this. They understood my decision and respected it, saying they figured I'd probably have to see it to believe it. Regardless, they helped me pack and sent me on my way. 3 weeks later, I moved in completely, ready to begin the rest of my life. At first, it took some getting used to. I was seeking the adrenaline rush from firefighting, which I miss so much. Normally, I'm a homebody. I found myself wanting to get out of the house more often. So I started looking for new hobbies to try out. I found a painting class in town, which felt perfect. 3 days later, I went to my first class, making a few friends right off the bat. We were assigned to do this freestyle painting session of anything of our choice. We had dividers between us to make sure every idea was original, and nobody could mistakenly feed off each other's ideas for inspiration. We still had conversation, just not about what we were painting. I told him I was new in town, which sparked a million different conversations about the area. We talked about everything from good restaurants, good places to hike, and places to avoid. Even though we had just met, I felt that I could trust what they were saying. Their words seemed to come with wisdom and experience. Before I knew it, we had been talking for about 25 minutes, and it was time to share what we had painted. I went first as the newbie, showing the fiery scene of a forest fire being doused with water. I told a short story of its inspiration, explaining the recent end of my career. A few people later, a younger man showed his painting of a pale naked being on all fours. Once again, I was faced with another story of someone with either first-hand experience or knowing someone who had seen it. I couldn't help but to start to feel a little weird at this point. Everyone couldn't be lying. I was running out of excuses not to be at least a little scared of seeing this thing. I could no longer blame just a child's imagination for it. This thing was way more common than I expected. 2 weeks later, I was sitting on the porch doing a Sudoku puzzle. Something scurried through my yard. My full focus was on my puzzle book, but my peripheral still caught it. Frozen, I could not have moved if I tried. Of course, the creature was on my mind. It never left. So I stood up, trying to get a head start in case I had to run suddenly, grabbing my phone to make sure it was on silent, to avoid drawing attention to myself. Then I stood there waiting to see if it would come back. I heard these tapping noises, like someone chopping wood nearby or something. Then, there it was again. It zoomed across my yard so fast I could barely see it well. It was so human-like, yet no human could physically be able to move that fast on all fours. It wasn't furry or feathered like an animal, nor did it move like one. It made no sense whatsoever. Not only were its movements non-human-like, but its face looked like something out of Insidious. No human has fully black eyes with no pupils. Not that I had time to overanalyze its facial features, because by the time I saw the face well, I had dropped my book and ran into the house. Turns out my dream of beginning the rest of my life had to be rewritten, because crawling creatures was not part of it. I rented the house out immediately, moving back to Los Angeles for the time being. I told my friend what I saw, and all they could say was, "I told you so." Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think of these stories in the comments below. Don't forget that you can listen to my episodes on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. I try to upload every single day on this channel, and on Donovan Dread too, where I release shorter content. Same great encounters, just a little bit shorter. Also, if you want to see crazy encounters captured on trail cams, then check out Dread Captures. It's part of the Dread Network, where we go over live footage of very strange encounters that are sent into the Facebook group or videos that are circulating on the web. Last but certainly not least, check out Lilith Dread. She releases the same great content daily on her channel. You'll find all of these links below. Thanks and take care.